Herbs and humans have a long interwoven history, including culinary, medicinal and spiritual values that are still relevant today.
Hackney Herbal is about reconnecting people with the knowledge and practices that have shaped cultures across the world.
It's about taking down the barriers to learning new skills and finding a way to link people back to their roots.
We offer free community activities in Hackney, made possible by the sale of our herbal teas and workshops.
Growing and using herbs can have a beneficial effect on well-being, so we believe it's important to provide space for people to reconnect with nature in our city.
The great thing about herbs is you can grow them in nearly any space, no matter how small, from car parks to rooftops.
Our workshops are designed to be creative, useful and fun. We run classes on everything from blending your own herbal tea to making herbal remedies and cosmetics.
We show you how you can both grow and make your own products without needing a lot of space or any specialist equipment. Today we're going to be looking at composting with worms, and I've got some here. I'm going to show you these now before they crawl away. So you can see one just here. And a quick tip before I forget, if you're ever handling worms, make sure you wet your hands first, because they don't like the dryness of our hands and it can be really horrible for them if you're picking them up. And the really lovely thing about composting with worms is that you can have something fairly small at home. This is a fairly big one, but you could have something a lot smaller, and they're really good thing to make use of for composting at home in small spaces. So particularly if you don't have a garden, if you've only got a little bit of space outside your house, you can get one of these, and they're really good for composting and recycling all your kind of kitchen scraps, so all your organic waste that you're producing at home. And they will give you this lovely rich compost, which is sometimes called worm casts and is essentially worm poo. So worms will kind of chew up kind of organic matter that's already gone a little bit sludgy, digest it. So the kind of entire body of a worm is pretty much its digestive tract. So it will kind of chew that up, process it, and poop out this really lovely compost. And I'm going to see if I can just get a bit of this without getting a worm. And you can probably hear that kind of squishiness, and that's showing you that this compost is kind of packed with moisture, so it's really good for retaining moisture when you add this to pots or the soil. It's packed with nutrition, so all the nutrition that was in your food scraps and cut flowers and things that you throw in, and the carbon from cardboard and things that you put in, will be turned into this lovely rich food, which is going to feed the soil. It's also going to improve the biology of the soil by adding in all the microorganisms that are in here, all the kind of life, and kind of enhance your soil and this compost in your pots and containers to really improve the soil and the conditions for your plants to be healthy and grow well. And it's turning something that would otherwise be wasted if you kind of throw away a lot of your like food scraps and things, and a really lovely way to make use of waste and reduce the amount of things that either go to landfill or go off to be incinerated. So the type of worms that we have in the wormery are either tiger worms or brandling worms. I got this a really long time ago, and I think I've got tiger worms. Sometimes when you get them, you get a mix of the two, and they're very different from earthworms. So they're a type of worm that enjoys a really rich diet, and if you were to find them kind of in the wild, they would be living in sort of compost heaps or manure piles where there's lots of food for them to eat. And they kind of adapt to their environment in terms of how big their population grows, so they kind of live in big colonies, populations, and adjust that based on how much space they have, how much food they have, so they can kind of adapt really easily to the conditions that they're in. And they kind of they process food and food scraps and organic matter really quickly, so it's a really good way to have something that's going to give you break down your food scraps quite quickly. And they kind of work throughout the year, so they work more in the summer. They kind of work best around sort of between 15 and 20 degrees. They slow down in the winter, but they can still process things, and they quite like a kind of continuous diet. So adding sort of little bits of food to the compost daily works really well for the worms, and also really suits us, because we're kind of producing scraps daily, so little bit each time. So what I'm going to do is talk you through the different layers of this thing and kind of the basics of how it works. So in this first top layer, there is where you add all your waste in. Worms generally will eat all your kind of fruit and vegetable peelings. They'll also eat things like tea bags, coffee grounds. You can put little bits of cut flowers in here. So those are all your kind of greens, your nitrogen rich things. And then what they also need, which you can kind of see I've got a bit here, is carbon. So I put in kind of ripped up cardboard, the inners of toilet roll tubes, sometimes newspapers and things. And what that also helps to do is to soak up a lot of the moisture that you'll be adding through your kitchen scraps, because the worms need moisture, but they don't like to be kind of waterlogged with too much moisture. So it's a happy balance that you need to try and find. But it's good to kind of, every time you add in some of your food scraps, to add in some browns as well. And I generally just kind of throw things in the top. It's quite good if you chop things up finely. It makes it a bit easier for them, because worms don't have teeth, so they have to wait until the food and scraps have already gone a little bit slimy, so they can come in and like start processing them. So chopping things up will help this go a bit quicker. And you kind of just want to throw things in. You don't want it to get too compacted, because the worms also need oxygen to survive, and you want this to stay aerobic, so kind of with oxygen, which will mean that it can break down properly and produce the type of compost that you want, as opposed to being anaerobic, which is without oxygen, where it's going to be smelly, it's going to be putrid, and you're going to encourage the wrong type of bacteria, and yeah, it's going to kind of go quite gross. If that does happen, and that has happened to me a few times, every now and then I kind of put in too much wet, or I'm not conscious about adding too much carbon. And what you can do, it's not the end of the world. You can kind of get back from that by adding in lots of browns, just moving the pile so you encourage a lot of oxygen, and gradually get that balance back to where the worms will be happy again. So that's the top layer, and I've got one which has got, you can see it's got 3 layers, so you kind of layer them up, and each of these trays has got loads and loads of holes in the bottom, so the worms can work their way between each level. And generally from the top is the kind of the least broken down, where you add things. Then there's a middle layer, which is kind of the working layer, and actually my kind of middle layer is fairly broken down. And then there's another layer underneath, which is even more broken down. And at the bottom, so the base of this, there is a tray, and this one's stood on legs, where all the moisture and the excess water is collected. So there's a little tap on the side, and I have a little bucket underneath where the tap stays open all the time, so that excess moisture can be drained out, and that just means you're not going to end up drowning your worms. And as well as being able to use this compost and the worm casts in your garden or indoor plants as well, indoor pots, any kind of thing that you're growing, the liquid that comes out the bottom is also really good for watering your plants with. So it will have a little bit of will have some nutrition kind of diluted from the compost that it's kind of passed through, but the most important thing about the liquid is that it's teeming with life. So it's alive with bacteria and fungi, and again all those microorganisms that I like to bang on about that are really important for soil health. So it's really good to kind of add that into your watering can when you're watering, and just spread it over your plants and your pots and your garden. There are quite a few different designs that you can get. You can also sometimes find that your local authority will be subsidising wormeries. So go onto your local authority website and see they often have partnership deals with places that make these. I tend to only really put vegetable, fruit, organic stuff in here. Technically, you can put sort of like meat and fish and anything like that in. You do run the risk of things not breaking down properly and going quite smelly. I don't eat those things, so I don't have them to compost. So it's kind of up to you with those things. Technically, the worms can eat through those things. They can't really eat through things like bones. You also hear that they don't really like citrus and chili. I kind of follow the worms eat what I eat, and as long as you're not putting tons and tons of just one thing in here and overwhelming them, they'll be fine. And it's good to have a balance. Like we like a balanced diet. Worms also like a balanced diet. So yeah, I kind of just bung things in and make sure, more important, to get the balance of browns, so cardboards, newspapers, toilet rolls and things with all your kitchen scraps. So yeah, you can also make your own at home. Most important thing if you're making it at home is to have drainage holes so that the worms don't get waterlogged, and that you can collect that water, that liquid, and that you kind of cut things up. Make sure there's air in your wormery, and don't worry if things go wrong, because you can come back from things going a little bit wrong. It's easy to adjust that balance. So nice way to make use of your scraps at home.